Hi, this is Lorraine Watry, and this video is going to go over how I transfer my drawing to my watercolor paper and then stretch it to attach it to a board and keep it from buckling and having too many hills and valleys while I'm painting on it. So the first step for me is that I will tear my paper down to the size that I need, and this is a full sheet of watercolor paper that I have already torn in half, and a full sheet of watercolor paper is 22 by 30 and a half sheet is 15 by 22. So I just need one of these, and I am going to tear it down again so that it becomes a quarter sheet. So I just make a mark at the 11-inch line. And then I use my ruler to give me a hard edge to tear against. And so with this is 140-pound paper, it's a little easier to tear than 300-pound. And so just giving it an angle and pulling back and pressing on the ruler, you can tear your paper. All right, so then I'm going to use this one. Arch's watercolor paper has a watermark on it, which you probably won't be able to see on the camera. You might be able to see if I hold it at an angle. And so a lot of times I will use the piece of paper that has the watermark to do little samples or techniques or things or things for classes, and then instead of having it on my painting when I'm done, I'll use it just as a sample piece of paper. And depends on what I'm doing, but sometimes if I can't avoid that watermark that's on the paper, then I will try to put it in a dark area of the paper, because the more paint that it has in that area where the watermark is, the less you notice the watermark. So then I know my drawing is 10 by 14, and I give myself a border when I do my paintings because that gives me a place to staple my paper down, and also an area that if I want to test my paint, I can use that area for that purpose as well. So I'm just marking 1/2 inch edges because that will give me the correct size. And one of my edges is just slightly, this edge is just slightly bigger than a 1/2 inch because it has the deckled edge from the paper, and so it'll look a little bigger than a 1/2 inch. I like to do my drawings on a separate piece of paper rather than right on the watercolor paper, and that way I can make any changes or adjustments on my drawing paper rather than on my watercolor paper. And one of the reasons that I do that is because the more you erase, or if I accidentally drew too hard with my pencil, it could damage your watercolor paper. So I will use a separate piece of paper to do the drawing. And then the other reason to do that is because if I decide that my painting is not going well, or maybe I decide I want to change a color that I've used, or I may decide at some point that I want to do that drawing again, then I can just take out my drawing that I already have and transfer it to my watercolor paper, and I don't have to basically reinvent the drawing every time I might want to make changes. So this painting is going to be of a bicycle that's laying on its side, and then the shadow from that bicycle that's laying on the ground. And it's for a class that I'm doing on painting shadows. So the photograph is one that I took last summer, and I'm not making really too many adjustments to it. I moved a few things in the photograph, and then I will paint the shadow with a little more color in it than what is seen here. So I did my drawing, and then I take that drawing and I ink it in a darker pen, and in this case I also used a second color to mark where the shadow is going to be, one so that I could show the students, and then also just if I need to refer back to it, it's easier to see where my shadow is. So the shadow in this drawing looks kind of reddish, even though I used a brown sepia pen. The way my copier copied it, it looks a little red. And then the bicycle, the actual subject, is in black, and then there are a few pebbles and things on the ground around the bicycle. So then now that my drawing is dark ink and I have everything ready to go for my drawing, then I will take this and put it with my watercolor paper on a light table. So I'll get my light table out. I use an accurate light table, and I think I got it through Deckled, but you might be able to find it at other companies as well. And this is just the surface here is just slightly smaller than maybe not slightly, I guess it's about 3 inches smaller than a half sheet of watercolor paper might be. So this one measures the surface where you can draw is about 12 inches by 20 inches, and the light table itself is around 15 3/4 by about 23 3/4. Just to give you information on the light table if you're interested in it. And accurate is ACURIT. And then in order to transfer my drawing to my watercolor paper, I have to turn off some of these lights because you won't be able to see the drawing as well. And you can maybe see it a little bit there. So I'm going to turn off some of these lights. So hopefully you'll be able to see it through onto the screen still. And let's see if that's all the way up. And then the other thing I'm going to do is pull the curtains in the art room here so that there is a little less light coming into the room itself. And I don't necessarily want it dark, but having it be a little less light is better for trying to transfer because you won't be able to see your lines as well otherwise. So then I just line up the lines that I drew on my watercolor paper, and I use a piece or two of masking tape to tape it down. Okay, and then I'm actually going to rotate my light table so that it's following the vertical aspect of my drawing. And then it's just a matter of slowly drawing the lines that I have on my paper, and I will slowly go through, and you probably won't be able to see much of this at all because I draw very lightly, so I want to make sure that my pencil line will not show through to my finished painting. So I'm just very lightly, there's almost no pressure as I'm letting my pencil kind of skim over the paper. And I will go through and completely get my drawing onto my paper, and then I will show you the next step in the process of how I get my watercolor paper stretched onto a board and ready for painting. As I was working on getting my drawing onto my paper, I thought of a few things that I might like to mention, and I'll start with the pencil that I'm using. I use a mechanical pencil with 5mm lead, the smaller lead, and it's HB lead. And I like it because it stays sharp for me, and as long as I don't draw with a lot of pressure, then it is the perfect pencil to get a drawing onto watercolor paper. I'll use a Pentel eraser that has the white eraser, and you can extend it. These are replaceable, and this is a good eraser to use, the white eraser, so that you don't end up possibly damaging your paper. You want to use a soft eraser, or you could use a kneaded eraser if you get off when you're drawing your image onto your paper. And then another thing is that if you don't have a light table, which when I first started doing watercolor myself, I didn't have a light table, and so I would take it to a window that had bright sunlight coming through it and tape it onto the window and use the window as my light source. And then if that is not something you either want to do or have access to enough light, then you could also just take a piece of glass or a glass table or something that you could shine light through and kind of craft a light table for yourself. And then eventually I ended up making myself a light table and made a wooden box and a piece of plexiglass on top of it, and used I believe they were under the counter lights for kitchens or something like that, but you could use LEDs now that LEDs are really common, and make yourself a light table. So the other thing I wanted to mention right quick, and then I'll get back to getting this drawn and we'll move on from there, is that when I'm doing a drawing, I will do a lot of detail in it. I mark where the highlights are and the shadows and give myself a lot of information, because I want to not have to think about it when I'm working on the painting. And if there is a place, which I don't know that this one really has a place in it, but if there were a place on my painting where maybe a shadow was going to be dark, and then as it went toward the light it had a soft edge, then I would give it sort of a wavy line to note that that edge is going to be soft in my painting. And I know of other artists that instead of a wavy line, they might mark that change to a softer edge by doing a little dashed line or some other mark to tell themselves the information they need to know as they're painting. So I will continue to get this onto my paper, and then when it's finished I will go on and show you how to get your paper onto the board so that it can start to be stretched. Okay, now I have my drawing on my watercolor paper, and I am ready to take my paper to the sink, or sometimes I will use a bigger container to put water in, and if I have a bigger piece of paper I can put the paper in that container and get it wet that way. And I will talk about the process as I'm going along, and basically I'm going to now take my drawing that is on my watercolor paper and get it on a board so that it can start to dry and be ready to paint on. So I'll remove my tape that I had my drawing taped to my paper with, and I will move some things around, and I'll be back with you in just a minute. All right, so I have everything set up to show you how to get the paper wet and to get it stretched onto your board. And so I have my drawing, and I think you can see that on the video that I have a light drawing of my subject on my paper, and I am now going to take it and get it wet. And before I do that, I just want to show you that the paper is stiff. It will stand up on its own. And this is 140-pound Arches cold press watercolor paper, and I am going to use my sink because it's a small enough paper and I can get it under the faucet without it touching any of the surfaces. You want to make sure that you don't touch your watercolor paper to anything that might have soap or other chemicals on it, because it could cause an issue on your paper when you're painting, that it would resist the paint, or it could have problems down the road if there was something in it that chemically could eat away at the paper. So I'm going to use a kind of lukewarm or room temperature water. I don't need it to be cold, but I don't want it to be hot. And I'm just going to use full stream, and I'm going to get it wet on both sides. So I just wet it on the front and then get the back side wet. And this can take 3 to 5 minutes depending on the size of your paper and just how quickly the paper absorbs or accepts the water into the fibers. And so it can depend on your brand of paper as well. And I do it on both sides several times, and then when you notice that the paper just wants to flop over like that, it very easily wants to just flop, then it's ready to go. And sometimes I'll give it just a few more passes just to make sure I've gotten the paper wet everywhere. And then I turn the faucet off, and I'm going to take it over to my board. So I'm pausing for a second, and I'll be right back. So I now have my paper over at my board, and if you haven't seen any of my supply list videos, this is a gator foam board, and it is foam core on the inside and then a hard surface on the outside, and it's either called gator foam or gator board depending on the company. And so I have set my watercolor paper onto it. I haven't taken any of the water out of it off of my paper, and I'm going to start stapling, and this is just a regular household stapler, and I'm going to start stapling on the longest end down here and then go to the other end. And I try to make my paper as straight as I can get it on my board so that when I'm painting I'm not distracted by it being crooked. So then my staples are about 1 inch to 1.5 inches apart. And if my paper starts to curl up a little bit while I'm stapling it, I usually am not too worried about it because most of those areas will dry flat without a problem. One thing you can do is if there's an area that's trying to kind of curl while you're working on it, you can kind of lift your paper and then set it back down. You do not want to stretch your paper, even though it's called stretching. the stretching happens while it's drying, and if you pull on it while you're stapling it, it usually will cause the fibers to overstretch, and when it's drying, it will it could pop the staples back out as it's drying. So now I've got both ends stapled, and I will go to the other edges. And you can see that it's very easy to staple into this board. And I can use this board over and over and over. I can use both sides, and they aren't very expensive, and they're very lightweight, so it's very portable to either use in your studio or carry around to a class or on location to paint. Get this done, and one more. And now I have to wait. So because my paper is saturated with water, I could start painting on it if I wanted to have a soft-edged painting. But because I want my painting to have edges that are hard-edged, and there's a specific subject matter, I'm going to wait for it to dry. It can take 4 hours approximately to overnight, depending on how wet your paper is, maybe the humidity of the area you live in, and you can take it to outside as long as it's not going to get anything on it in the sun. You could sit it in a warm place in your house, and that would help it dry. One of the things that I have started doing is that as my paper is drying, instead of leaving it flat like this, sometimes I will take it with a paper towel down below or a regular towel and just prop it up so that the water will slowly run down the page, and it will effectively help it to dry because it's dripping the water off of the paper. And that will help it dry a little bit faster. So then when I'm ready to work on this, my paper needs to be not have a temperature when I touch it. If it looks dry but it feels cool to the touch, that means that the paper is still somewhat damp. And so when you think your paper is completely dry, just touch it with the back of your hand and make sure that it feels like it's room temperature. It shouldn't feel like it's cool or has a temperature really. And then once my paper is completely dry, then if I'm going to use masking fluid or tape to reserve some of the whites, that's when I can go ahead and apply the masking fluid. Because if I apply masking fluid while the paper is still wet, that masking fluid will spread and disperse and have soft edges, and sometimes, depending on the masking fluid, it can kind of attach into the fibers, and then you have a harder time getting it off of your paper. So that is stretching of your watercolor paper. And and then one other thing is that this is a 1/4 sheet of paper, and depending on how wet I'm going to paint, sometimes I will just tape my paper down. Usually 1/4 sheet or larger, I will do the stretching method. And but if it's something smaller, if I were going to do maybe half this size, then I might just tape my paper to my board, and I don't actually go through the whole process of stretching it. So it really can depend on if you like, if you don't mind your paper kind of moving and waving as you're painting on it, or if you'd rather have a smooth surface while you're painting. And so I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, please note them in the comments below this video, and I will try to put links into this video showing where you can purchase the boards and other art supplies. And see you later. I hope you have fun painting. Thanks. Bye.